It's my great honor this morning to be able to introduce a member of the faculty of the National Training Center, an initiative of the National Diversity Council. It's my honor to present Denise Pirrotti Hummel, who is both an attorney and the Chief Innovation Officer of Lead Inclusively, which is a firm devoted to empowering diverse leadership and teams. Her resume, as I said earlier, is truly just staggering, a list of accomplishments so long that it would take us the entire length of the webinar to go through that. She's both a TED Talk finalist, a member of the Marshall Goldsmith Legacy 100 Coaches. She's a board member of Healthcare Business Women's Association and chair of Athena's Life Services Committee. She's a serial entrepreneur and chief executive officer who successfully sold her cross-cultural business to Ernst & Young, where she became a principal. She's practiced employment law, international mergers and acquisitions as an attorney. She has a unique accomplishment of winning the first class action lawsuit for the American with Disabilities Act. Perhaps she'll tell you some more about that. She's led some of the most significant people integrations of both the tech and pharma industries. She's a staunch advocate of women helping navigate the nuances of organizations to both achieve and fit in at the senior most levels and on boards, which is a reason I'm sure many of you have dialed in for this webinar today. Today she's here to tell us how that can be done with her webinar, which is entitled Uniting with Men to Advance Women Through Senior Leadership. And with that, I'll turn it directly over to Denise.
Thanks so much, Jim. That was a lovely introduction. Hello to everyone. Denise Hummel here. Just one more protocol announcement. We have Chelsea Semiclose, a member of the Lead Inclusively team, joining us, and she'll be posting some important links in the chat section throughout the session, including citations for studies and an action plan that you can download, and as Jim mentioned, an evaluation link. You can submit your questions at any time into the chat bar, and I will address as many of them as I can during the designated Q&A in between sections of this presentation. I don't actually have visibility into the chat while I'm presenting, but Jim will field those questions and comments for me. We're hoping for smooth technology. It doesn't seem to ever happen for me, but we're hoping to have a cooperative internet signal audio. If you're having any difficulty with that, Jim will likely pick that up from the chat bar as well. We don't have a hard stop in an hour, but we'll be respectful and conscious of the time for those who do, just so you know. And now, as Jim mentioned, I am the Chief Innovation Officer of Lead Inclusively. Very briefly about us, we're a talent advisory firm focused on helping clients to create a better workforce through belonging. And we do that because organizations cannot achieve full performance without a workforce that is activated for all. Our general way of engaging is to assess the organization's diversity and inclusion maturity, and then we bring sustainable solutions that accelerate the journey. And to relate to the ROI that diversity and inclusion can produce, I'll just mention that one of our high-tech clients recently asked us to assess their gender parity issues, and by implementing targeted solutions over a period of time, we increased their employee engagement for both men and women by approximately 17% over a one-year period in that region. And we have equally compelling metrics in the area of increased innovation, as well as the more obvious benefits of increasing the ability to recruit, retain, and advance key talent, key diverse talent. These are the kind of dramatic results we're hoping you will experience as you evolve in your gender parity journey. So I think we should just get started. Oops, one second. Speaking of
Denise, allow me just for a second, since so many people joined in the last 2 or 3 minutes, I just want to remind everyone the meeting is being recorded and it will be available afterwards. So feel free to take notes, but if for whatever reason you become confused, concerned, or aren't certain, you'll be able to go back and listen to this, and we'll be glad to send you the link after the webinar is completed.
Okay, wonderful. So today we'll be taking you on a journey from creating a foundation for the need for men and women alike to be champions of change to help women move through senior leadership. through sharing a bit about the female leadership experience, to a strategy for uniting to achieve gender balance, and finally to sort of a homework action plan that you can start immediately this week. We've even created a hidden link on our website just for webinar participants so that you can download some supplemental materials that can guide you going forward. And Chelsea, if you would put that in the chat box now. Let me level set a little by saying that there are over 200 people on the call, and each of you are at varying stages of your organizational or personal journey. If you're at one extreme or the other, reach out to us after the webinar, and I can share with you some materials that will be directly on point with that stage of your journey. But for now, let's set the ground rules for a meaningful discourse between us, which is to keep an open mind and demonstrate respect for each other's opinions and work together to move this issue from a gender issue to a workforce issue that we can all solve together. There are many different approaches, as you probably know, to accelerating gender parity, and there's plenty of room to learn from each of us. I'd like to share with you a bit about my path to senior leadership. Many of you know the public-facing story, and for those of you on this webinar, I will share a bit of the backstory too, in the hopes that it will provide some context, not only to share my own learning experiences, of course, but to create a bit of a snapshot for the lives of many senior female leaders. The hope is that by sharing with the men on the call, they will have a greater understanding of some of the extra hidden hurdles that women face, and that by sharing with the women on the call that some will identify with what I experienced and may be inspired or supported to continue their journey through middle management to senior leadership, or from senior leadership to the C-suite. If you're on the call from HR or the leader of a team or organization, I will definitely be addressing information for your organizational action plan as well. So there should be, I'm hoping, something for everyone. So first, the public-facing story. I think Jim did a very good job, so I'm just going to whiz through it. I was an employment law litigator who had a landmark case in the area of diversity. I pivoted to international mergers and acquisitions law for two reasons. One, I wanted to be, I wanted a more international career, basically. I was always fascinated by culture. That was definitely one reason. And the second, because I began to feel that as an attorney, I was more a part of the workforce problem than I was a part of the solution. And when I pivoted to international M&A law, I developed a cross-cultural model that is now being used by EY in its talent division, Aon Hewitt in its M&A division, and Deloitte in its global mobility division. I scaled that business to 65 countries and sold it to Ernst & Young, as Jim mentioned, where I became a direct admit partner in human capital, and I led a division that was focused on talent, inclusion, and innovation. And then, of course, you already know that I exited EY to lead my new company. But the backstory to this is that the reason I built the original business to begin with was that I took off 10 years to raise my kids. You know, some people take 3 months, some people take a few years. Well, for me, it was, the magic number was 10. I found myself in the middle of a divorce. I was not admitted to practice law in the state where we were living and couldn't leave the state due to a child care visitation order, which I'm sure most of you, child visitation, I'm sure many of you, not all of you, but many of you have dealt with. I was raising the kids single-handedly. I had lost touch with the working world to some extent. I was using my limited independent savings, since most of our money was tied up in the house. And at the time the business was acquired, causing me to become relatively, wealthy as a result. The day before the deal closed, I was at the end of my savings and wondering what I would do and where I would go with my children if I lost the house. Now, in contrast, my husband, who had not taken any time off and who had the kids on the weekend, was experiencing only one pressure of doing the job for which he had a long track record and collecting his paycheck. My reason for sharing this is not to whine and not to get a pat on the back. It's just to metaphorically give context to the big picture. Which brings me to the issue of statistics. Men and women in the workplace have very different realities, and the statistics are somewhat correlated with what I shared with you about my own path. In addition to the fact that the ratios of women taking time off to raise kids is extremely disparate to men taking time off for that purpose. A large percentage of women bear responsibility as both the primary breadwinner and one primarily responsible for household duties. 43%, in fact, as compared to only 12% of men. Second, many men have female spouses or spouses whose careers do not encompass extraordinary hours and a high degree of travel, whereas many women do. And lastly, no surprise to probably any of us, women are dealing with career obstacles that range from subtle to extreme forms of discrimination, which has the impact of derailing their motivations and sometimes their entire careers. We do, however, have a lot to look forward to when we reach gender parity. If you consider the fact that sales revenue increases 3% for every 1% closer to gender parity, the economics start to get really exciting. However, not only do we not see the gap closing over time, it's actually widening. And Chelsea, if you'd put the relevant links in the chat bar, that would be wonderful. If that for some reason doesn't work out, we can get that to people later, but it would be great if you could do that. So I initially found it fascinating how many younger colleagues would share with me that they don't see a problem. So young men tell me that they see their female colleagues as equal, and they can't imagine an era where that wasn't true. And young women share with me that 50% of their colleagues at entry level are female, and they too don't quite see the problem. But for those of you who are beyond the initial stages of your career in middle management, you may notice that those numbers start to dwindle. So McKinsey's 2016 Women in the Workplace report, which was based on data for over 34,000 men and women, basically showed that women are increasingly underrepresented as they move up the talent pipeline, and that only 30% of middle managers make it through to senior management. And by the time women reach the C-suite, their numbers are at about 19% compared to 81%. And Chelsea, if you have that citation, I'd appreciate it if you would chat that now. There are many reasons why we as women can't get there alone. From a practical point of view, women who advocate for themselves during meetings, performance reviews, or other workforce interactions are often seen as whining. And secondly, for example, in a study of over 350 professionals who were rated by an average of about 5 colleagues and supervisors, the Center for Creative Leadership found that women who are seen as champions for other women are actually being penalized on their performance reviews when compared to men whose performance ratings actually increase when they advocate for women. The reason is, at least partially, because women who advocate for other women are seen as showing sort of a kind of favoritism, while men who speak up for women are seen as champions. And if we're able to partner with our male colleagues and transition our organizations from a sort of, hashtag Me Too mentality to a hashtag We Too mentality, so that would be Me Too to We Too, then we're creating a workforce that's better for performance from all of us, right? There's a very credible argument for the fact that we all win at that point. And Chelsea, there's a citation for that as well. So with all the polarization around the hashtag Me Too movement, I wanted to share that, the simple fact is that most men are allies in the workplace rather than being more akin to the Harvey Weinsteins of the world. Thank goodness, right? And that's because, I think it's likely because most men have mothers, they have wives, they have girlfriends, they have daughters, and they have colleagues that they want to believe have a fair shot in the world. These are men who are wanting to team for mutual prosperity for the entire organization, and to a large extent they aren't helping because we're not reaching out with our stories and we're not giving them active tools to help. Now, before I give you a few more, reasons, that are based on our experience, it would be great if you guys could be chatting about some of the other reasons that things aren't different. So why are women still struggling with the same challenges across decades? Why are men, not coming to the table and really helping if most of them really want to do so and care? And again, just to remind you and Jim as well that I don't have visibility into the chat, so you can let me know if I should wait, or you can, Jim, you can read off a few of them if you like, and then I'll move on.
Yeah, we have lack of understanding, and this apparently is coming from a male, how to help and support.
Okay, great.
And by the way, as a male, I would say that's probably true. We don't want to, the males don't want to seem to be invasive. So how can we help and support without appearing overtly, to be intrusive?
Right.
Thank you, Clay.
Right. So I'll start.
I got another one.
Okay.
Denise, we are all more comfortable with what we are used to seeing around us. And ineffective competition, B/T women.
Okay. By the women. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that.
Between. It was.
Between.
I'm a senior citizen almost over here, so between is B/T. Sorry.
No worries. No worries. All right, so I'll give you a couple more explanations as well. We've already touched upon, a certain lack of awareness, but one additional element has to do with social conditioning, right? Depending on the family cultures, the generational culture, the industry culture, or the national culture, there is social conditioning related to some behaviors that are just, unproductive and even hurtful. And there's also resistance to addressing these issues and making them a priority. So that's one. The next is unconscious bias, and that prevails in all of us. Each one of us has responses that are predicated on our life experience. And I love the expression, if you have a brain, you have unconscious bias, because it's absolutely true. That means that you have associations or judgments related to a grouping of stimuli. And that's not just gender itself, but judgments related to how a leader is defined. So perhaps you think a leader must be either tough or empathetic, but not both. Or you may feel that leaders are extroverts rather than introverts. Or you may have an idea of what a leader's communication style is like. And you may even have an idea of what a leader looks like, sounds like, dresses like, and walks like. Bystander bias, you may see or hear statements or actions that you know are inherently wrong, but in wanting to be one of the group, you may be unwilling to push back on the behavior in front of others. And lastly, for purposes of today's discussion, your company culture or industry norms may create a sense of tolerance for both a lack of diversity in the workplace and a culture that doesn't promote belonging or inclusion for the women that are employed there. Now, even large companies, frankly, fail to approach diversity and inclusion the way they do their other business goals. So in general, only 85% of them track diversity and inclusion statistics of any kind. That means only 85% know how many women are even applying, let alone how many may be asked to interview, be extended offers, accept those offers, become retained for 2 years or more, or advance through the organization in a manner that's commensurate with their male counterparts. And failure to create baseline metrics against which to improve is one of the major reasons that the gender gap has prevailed for as long as it has. Now, before we go on to a snapshot of the female experience, which is next on our agenda, let me stop, and if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat bar, and Jim will send those on to me, or we'll repeat those to me, and we'll take as many as we can for now, and then, of course, feel free to interact with me after the webinar if you have a burning question. Jim,
I have several things. Yes, I have several things going back a couple slides. Let me pull up here one of the questions, which I thought was pretty interesting. What is the best approach for male sponsorship or mentorship? That probably is a big, broad question. So perhaps we'll deal with some of that, and that may require further, commentary. A traditional understanding of gender roles. especially as relates, I think, to previous generations, which I can tell you is certainly true. And then when we say U.S. companies, are we talking about companies of a certain size?
Okay, so I'll take the easiest one first. Yes, they are of a certain size. I don't have the study in front of me, but I do specifically remember that they were very large organizations, and I'll ask Chelsea to get you that information as soon as possible. And then I think, hopefully I remember this correctly, one of the questions was the best way to create male sponsorship or mentorship, and I think I think I'll answer that by saying, and keep in mind that we will be getting to some of these solutions, but just to give some immediate gratification on this issue. One, I want to say there is a big difference between sponsorship or mentorship. A lot of people confuse the two. Mentorship is simply being available to a colleague who is coming up through the ranks, who has questions, who needs to increase their substantive knowledge in a particular area, or even run some ideas by you. It's often an informal relationship, not always, but it's often an informal relationship. Sponsorship is actually making yourself not responsible, but to some extent accountable for that person's success. You're actually helping them to navigate the organizational culture. You're advocating for them at performance reviews and for promotion. You are actively putting them on stretch assignments and other ways to create visibility for them. So we'll get into that a little bit more in another section. And then, Jim, I'm afraid that the question regarding traditional, I remember traditional response to gender roles, but what was the actual question?
Well, it just is a comment from Peter, traditional understanding of gender roles and then it says previous generations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that is changing over time, but the current predictions for gender parity are at over 200 years, which is interesting considering that the generation in terms of Gen Y and Gen Z coming up, it's not going to take 200 years to get to that point. But I absolutely agree that to some extent it is a generational issue. And in the interest of time,
and by the way,
yep.
Sorry, I know. Yeah, we're going to have to press for time, but Grace has asked a good question too.
Sure.
What could be unintended consequences of men participating in the training primarily as support for women versus addressing biases toward their own male gender?
I think there can always be.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there can always be unintended consequences, right? So, for example, I don't think that, at least, I don't know, I was a little bit blindsided by the extent of the backlash with hashtag Me Too, where I have been told by some of our clients that, legal is even saying to male senior leaders, don't have private meetings with women, don't go to dinner with them, don't get in the same car, don't close the door. I mean, these are all very extreme backlash that we could not have anticipated, and that don't apply to any but the most egregious men. So I think there's always the potential for unintended consequences, and I think the key here, before we move on, is just to say no one is saying to support a woman who is not qualified or is not motivated or is not meeting her performance goals. What we're saying here is to support women who might be experiencing some other barriers to success that have nothing to do with her performance. So hopefully I've answered that, and I'm available to answer other questions after the webinar. I just want to be respectful of the people that need to exit at the top of the hour. So let's, we can't capture the entire female experience, right? We're on a 1-hour webinar, but we are going to address 3 key areas that are the easiest to overlook, I think. The next few slides are screenshots directly from our Champions of Change workbook, which we developed to add a bit of camaraderie and levity while maintaining the seriousness of the discussion. And you'll see what I mean, because this fun little caricature is in our workbook. But the first and most significant element of the female leadership experience I'm calling the leadership conundrum. And that conundrum is simply stated as follows. If I, as a senior female leader, behave as most leaders are expected to act in American corporate society, to someone's point earlier about the gender roles, that is, if I act as confident and assertive, I am labeled, easily labeled as a I'm just going to say for purposes of the webinar, witch, but I think you know what I mean. In short, I'm told that I'm overly aggressive and or unlikable. If alternatively, I do not behave assertively and with confidence, I'm labeled as not being leadership material. And that conundrum is at the base of much of the sticky middle. If you hear HR or D&I professionals talk about the sticky middle, this is what they're talking about from a diversity and inclusion perspective. More negative performance reviews related to female middle managers utilize the term aggressive than any other term, compared to men, where the term is rarely used except to recommend more of it. And Chelsea, there's a citation for that too. If you have that available, I'd love it if you would put that in the chat bar. As a senior female leader in one of the largest organizations in the world, I was specifically told at my review that I was the, quote, most responsive and capable leader he had ever seen on his team. I just wasn't likable because I was too aggressive. And there was an actual example that was given to me because I said, really, how does that manifest itself? And he explained that it took most partners a full year to get a landing page for their new product or services when they joined, and that I had accomplished it in just 1 month. And that was cited as proof of my aggressiveness and requested behavior change. As you can probably imagine, the essence of what had gotten me from the founder of a one-person organization to one who scaled it to 65 countries and sold it to a large organization, being cited as an inadequacy, that kind of feedback is not known to be terribly motivating to women whose drive and perseverance drives revenue. So please use the chat bar to share if you've ever experienced or witnessed something like this, or how you felt under circumstances, and any strategies that you've used. What's worked and what hasn't worked. I think, again, I can't see the chat bar, but I think you're going to hear women who have adapted their behavior, contorting, beyond their zone of authenticity to deal with this conundrum, and those who have given up on trying to surpass this conundrum, and others who have, successfully averted it. But Jim, feel free to let me know if there are any comments that you want to share before I sort of give you my little recap on this issue.
Nope, just continue, please.
Okay, I will. So at the end of the day, it's really our organizations that have to be at the helm of this culture change. The leadership conundrum can't be solved without active values cultural values that are related to this issue, and also performance KPIs, so performance goals related to inclusive leadership behaviors. And we're not, on another webinar in the series, we'll be talking about what inclusive leadership behaviors are. But there have to be direct performance goals associated with them, and frankly, they should be in some way tied to compensation. That in our experience, is kind of the coup de grace, or the icing on the cake. That's what really gets behavior to change. The next issue we'll discuss is this whole concept of leaving before you leave. Many of you have probably heard of Sheryl Sandberg's famous expression, don't leave before you leave. It's a known phenomenon that when women reach childbearing years, and it's typically correlated with middle management, that they begin to opt out, even before they have children. So Sheryl recites this iconic conversation with a woman she describes as high potential, where she encouraged her to apply. I think it was for a promotion, and the young woman responded, "I don't think that's a good idea because I want to have children." And Cheryl was surprised because she didn't even know her protege was married. And the woman responds, "No, I'm not married. I'm not even in a relationship yet, but I will be someday, and I don't want to set myself or my boss up for disappointment." So as extreme as it may seem that women are opting out even before they actually are in the process of having a family, the reality is that statistically, women feel an overwhelming sense of wanting to do the right thing and allowing guilt to predominate when making, present career decisions, even prior to, the crossroads. And we also generally fail to initiate discussions or planning about leaving and coming back, or engage in discussions to set expectations with our employers. And likewise, organizations generally are not reaching out for discussions relating to the tools or support our family, our female colleagues will need when they actually do prepare to engage in maternity leave. Basically leaving to fate, whether they will come back and all those other issues, when they'll come back, the level of support or interaction during the actual leave period. So for women who do leave for a more extended time, many are not keeping up their certifications or their credentials, or having active discussions relative to re-engaging. And Jim, if there's any chat going on, do let me know, because I think that's really worth sharing. If you have any strategies that you've observed, let me know. For me, when I left to raise my kids, I basically called myself Denise Hummel and Associates. I kept an online presence. I continued to publish, and I even started speaking again at night when I started using a babysitter. So long story short, I kept moving my career forward, even though I couldn't devote myself fully to that endeavor. And just to know, many companies are also initiating programmatic ways of keeping in touch with their female workforce when they leave, and using other methods to keep them engaged until they're ready to come back, mostly by reaching out and asking, periodically what these women need to keep the relationship going. And Jim, anything you want to say, or should I move on?
No, we're good. We're good.
We're good. Okay. All right.
Wait. No, I have something. Let me read it to you. Sitting in a meeting and being referred to as a female, and my colleagues being referred to as a man, made me keenly aware of my reproductive position and his human position, as if the presumed body functions were relevant in the workplace. I realized that women are rarely referred to as women, but female. And men are referred to as guys or men. Biology versus humanity. Very good point.
So interesting. Wow, that's really interesting. And this is what I mean. Do chat, you guys, because it's my job to empower the talent on the call. You have a lot of experience, male and female, and you can very much be a part of the solution by contributing. This is not a one-way street by any means. So lastly, in this particular section of the webinar, a traditional complaint about women in leadership positions is that they're too emotional. So in our Champions of Change workshop, where I teach the male track and one of my male partners teaches the female track, many men talk to me about the fact that they're highly fearful, and they do use the word fearful, and you can see it on their faces, of the possibility of a woman crying in their presence during a performance review or another sensitive topic. And many women speak in the female track about how they're criticized in a work scenario where they appeared transparently to be emotionally upset, for example, while she announced a significant reduction in force for her division. So, and if you know what I'm talking about, use the chat bar here with each other. The truth is that empathy is gaining very strong momentum, and in fact, some significant leaders are talking about it as the new micro competency. Marshall Goldsmith, who's a very significant mentor of mine, Alan Mulally, former CEO of Ford, another great mentor of mine, they talk about empathy as a new microcompetency. And specifically, I will tell you that when delivering difficult communication, the open expression of empathy used by many women in the workplace often results in a better outcome. It results in less risk, less lawsuits, and more or less a stronger connection with human dignity, which leads to better engagement and retention. So just something to know. And do we have any sort of questions or comments? I mean, the issues discussed are just microcosms of the myriad of issues women deal with in the workplace that are different from some of the gender-neutral challenges of moving through to senior leadership that are faced by men and women alike. But before we move on to discuss how to unite to change this paradigm, let me know if you have any questions. Jim, any questions?
No, we're good,
Okay.
But I do want to remind everyone of a comment you made, which is another webinar in the series. Denise is going to be, over the course of 2018, presenting 4 webinars. So this is just the first of 3 additional ones, which will give everyone an in-depth review of this subject and other subject matter that's quite important.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So how can we unite to solve these issues together? Because that's really, at the end of the day, why we're here, and I think we'll likely have an entire webinar based on that alone, on how we can unite and what the action plan needs to be. But let's first talk about the organizational efforts that can assist with gender parity. It's extremely common for even very developed companies to have very underdeveloped D&I strategies. With all that organizations are tasked with to maximize their time, talent, and treasure, and without a lack of deep understanding as to the economic impact of a non-diverse and non-inclusive workforce, it's no wonder that sometimes the diversity and inclusion strategy can be a bit ad hoc. So we're finding that many organizations will, let's say, they'll fund employee resource groups, and some will fund a hypo, women, I'm not going to use the term female after that comment, but women coaching program for, potential women leaders. But some will even mandate, unconscious bias training in addition to, say, regulatory sexual harassment training. But in the long run, when we can be systemized in our approach and accept that we're on a long and sustainable journey where we need to understand what's broken before we fix it, we can actually create lasting change that has an impact on the ability to recruit, retain, and advance diverse talent. We can increase employee engagement and promote, that diverse ideation and the innovation that comes with it, which is, at the end of the day, what we all want as businesses. And we strongly promote a journey that's intended to inquire, inspire, enlighten, empower, and experience. And by that we mean that quarter by quarter, over a period of about a year, begin with an organizational assessment and implement the sustainable solutions that specifically address the gaps found. So again, after there's an organizational assessment to determine the gaps in every area of the business, we can create a targeted diversity and inclusion vision and strategy, and only then can we adequately address the gaps indicated by the assessment. For example, if the assessment indicates potential bias in the hiring or performance assessment process, then an HR diversity and inclusion lab can help to engineer the bias out of these processes. If a leadership assessment indicates a gap in inclusive leadership behaviors, workshops on inclusive behaviors can be instrumental in closing the gap. If the assessment indicates, a lack of support for the target demographic, then a solution that supports that demographic, in this case women, can be implemented through coaching, employee resource groups, and other very targeted employee programs. Honestly assess your inclusion maturity. I can't emphasize that more, including the ability to interview a diverse slate of candidates, put women in management positions, particularly senior director and above, women being promoted, and women in succession plans, and develop a diversity and inclusion vision that's bold and a strategy to match. and create metrics that matter by tracking, inclusion scores along with team efficiency and productivity. Compare, female engagement scores with male engagement scores, and ask the tough questions about what dollars are being left on the table in terms of attrition and team performance. That's really one of the major keys to closing the gender gap. Now, as male and female champions, as we transition for change, there are several ways that each of us can build that transition bridge. So for women, they can build alliances by reaching out for the support they need, and also by resisting the impulse that they have to know everything about the solution, right? We don't have all the answers. And our humanity and vulnerability is a bridge builder for men who are ready, willing, and able to reach out on the other side. We can also ask for constructive feedback from those we trust, male and female, and we can reach out for new opportunities that bring visibility, that expand on our skill set, and that are likely to lead to promotion. And for our male champions, they can build support by providing access to leadership for aspiring female leaders, by considering women on their team for stretch assignments, even if there are men on the team that have supposedly done it all before. And they can provide women with budget resources, team support, and time for experimentation, innovation, and diverse ideation when it's feasible to do so. So more specifically, for women, find sponsors. If they're male sponsors, even better, because you get a different perspective. Don't leave before you leave, as we mentioned before. Be willing to take risks and pursue bigger roles. And for men, provide support in meetings. So, for example, if if you're in meetings where women are constantly interrupted, which is statistically the case, stop and allow that woman to finish her thought and credit her with the idea. Recognize women publicly. Ask women to co-lead projects with you. Find out about when they call you, for example, to speak on a panel, ask what the gender parity is. And if the gender parity isn't good, offer up a female colleague to speak. If you see something that just doesn't look or feel right, say something. It doesn't have to be antagonistic. It can just be, very polite. Encourage women to throw their hats in the ring for high visibility opportunities. That's one thing that you can really do to support women on your team. And all of these acts as individuals provide a bridge from the backlash that we just that we spoke about before of hashtag #MeToo, and create that transition to the positivity and collaboration of hashtag #MeToo. So let's take a moment, if we can, and please be generous with your thought leadership. I'd like to take a minute for people to respond to these prompts in the chat bar. You can feel free to use these prompts on the screen or add your own comments. Remember, there's a lot of collective leadership. There's almost 200 people on this call, and I know it's tempting to just kind of double task and be doing other things. We're all pressured to do that. But to the extent that you can contribute to your colleagues, that would be absolutely wonderful. I'm also going to encourage you after the webinar to go to our homepage to take our organizational maturity mini assessment. It is not the full assessment, but in the event you want our feedback about how to accelerate the path you're on, please feel free to do that as well. And Jim, I'll pause here just to see if there's anything you want to point out in terms of what you're seeing on the chat bar.
Well, you got a comment that says, "Thank you, all caps, for your amazing webinar." So I think you're providing good information. I would like to point out, if you don't mind me just kind of interjecting, I could have saved this to the end. It's interesting to me, especially in having done now dozens of women in leadership symposiums, the difference or the importance, at least, of understanding where someone is, whether their issue is more personal or it's corporate. And by that I mean, if you're looking for a mentor or a sponsor on an individual level, that is a strategy. and you can have tactics for that. But you've also brought into this conversation how to change, and I put down culture change, not numbers game. And I think too many companies are playing a numbers game without worrying about the culture change. And so for those people that are in a position to actually help change the culture, that's stepping up and becoming involved. Would you have some more comments coming in?
Jim, I just wanted to say that, just quickly, that's so our mission is to help companies to ignite inclusion as an accelerator for business performance. So the diversity issue is the number of people, the mix, right? But it's the inclusion elements that really create the ability to retain and advance women that will close the gender gap. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, I have several questions coming in.
Sure.
Our suggestions for tracking metrics, internal surveys and census, and again, that's part of the culture change, I think, but let me read a couple more. Do you have any suggestions for someone working at a company that claims to value gender equality but doesn't seem to be actively prioritizing it? I've got comments.
Let's start that, Jim. Yeah, let's do that one at a time because unfortunately my memory is not good enough to respond to multiple. So, and metrics is near and dear to my heart. It is so critical. I cannot express it more. And you're 100% right. So companies are often tracking, how many women do we have? And some of them are even tracking how many, at the entry level, how many in middle management, how many in senior leadership. And I'm not poo-pooing that's important, but you are absolutely right. It's not the whole picture. To really put metrics alongside that matter, you have to be tracking. Are you presenting a diverse slate of candidates, or are you? Does your institution run by Jim and Robert? Talk about the guys that they have worked with in the past and that they play golf with, and that ends up being, the next VP of sales or what have you. So do you have a diverse slate of candidates? It all starts there. Are you interviewing a diverse slate? Are you hiring diverse people? And once they're in, are you checking in with them? Are you doing pulse surveys? Are you doing all of the steps that you can do to actually retain them? Once they're being considered for promotion, are you engineering the bias out of the performance evaluation process? All of these metrics matter. They are the ones that matter. And in terms of a company that says they're doing it and doesn't do it, of course, depending on your position within that company, you may have more or less influence. But verbalizing the business case here and talking about, what I said before, which is we are largely what we measure, right? So if we don't, for example, have performance goals that are actively connected with leaders who are showing, or managers who are demonstrating inclusion in their management and leadership, and actually putting a score related to that and actually linking compensation to that, then we're not doing what we need to do on the metrics front. And Jim,
okay, you're throwing it back to me. Yeah,
we can. We can. Why don't we leave the questions at this point to the end, because we're almost at the end, and I want to make sure that anyone who needs to leave at the top of the hour can, if that's okay with you. So
sure,
the goal will be to finish with time to spare, a little bit of time to spare. So what I wanted to do is just show you these last few slides, because you're absolutely right. There is a corporate reflection that needs to be done. And then, of course, there are ways that we can help as individuals. So this is corporate reflection. And then, in terms of our, women reflection, here's something that you guys can talk about, chat about, for our female audience, if you've attended the webinar to learn more about moving towards senior leadership, this is your time to share thoughts about your journey, and you can use these prompts, or you can share whatever you like. for you, we encourage you to take, the gender parity quiz on our homepage, because it might help you to support the business case for coaching, for example, which is absolutely critical. I use a coach. I have from the second that it was offered to me. I believe in stakeholder-centered coaching, but there are many different types of coaching, You might also get some ideas on our website for development of employee resource groups that focus on female leadership. And then lastly, in terms of men, before we're going to get to an action plan in a second, but for men on the call, do share your thought leadership, either relevant to these prompts or others. And we also encourage you as well to, either take the gender parity quiz or the mini assessment, do something, share this with your HR partner that is supporting your team as well, so that you can actually make a difference. We value you, we need you, and it does not diminish our power as women to ask you for help, because statistically you are in power. If we wanted to do it alone and take a heck of a long time to do that, we can, but we absolutely prefer to have your assistance. So one thing I want to make sure that everybody has before the top of the hour, and I do not have a hard stop, so I'm here for your questions. But I do want you to know that the last step in the process is to create an action plan, and to do that, it would be helpful to download some of these supplemental materials we created. So, Chelsea, if you could chat that now, I would appreciate it. I'm not saying that these materials are the be and end all. We took some of the slides that we thought were most actionable, and we also created just kind of like a little bit of a grid for you, just to really create some SMART goals associated with this. Obviously, if you are the leader of an organization or team, or you are a chief diversity officer on the call, or a CEO, we're happy to talk to you about a sustainable transformation. But you can still take action on your own as well. And lastly, just remember, we're looking for your feedback by answering the 3-question evaluation. So, Chelsea, if you could chat the evaluation. And the reason for this is, as Jim mentioned, this is a series, and we want to present what matters to you most. I'm almost feeling like we need an entire webinar on the action plan alone. And so before we switch to questions, I'm just going to say it's really important for all of us who are dedicated to making gender parity an economic imperative work together to make this happen. As far as I'm concerned, every participant on this call is an honored colleague. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Stay in touch. And Jim, I am now open for whatever questions are coming up, or comments that you want to share, and can stay on until you tell me that most people have dropped off.
Okay, I've got several things. First, I'm going to go, if you don't mind, to my notes, and then I'll go to the comments that are in the chat bar.
Sure.
My personal comment is, what I wrote down early on was, most men want to help. But the challenge is, for men at least, where is the line? Where do we cross beyond help? And there's got to be, in my opinion, Denise, but you're welcome to give your opinion, which is what people value. Where do we begin to be, I don't know, too directive instead of helpful? And I don't think that you need to answer that specifically. It's just a concern for men.
But I do want to answer it, because it's so simple. The answer to that question is ask. You go to a female leader, perhaps because she's struggling, or perhaps because she appears to you to be such a rock star. You really want to make sure that she succeeds, or perhaps you think that she's got potential that she's not achieving, and you privately say to her, how is this experience going for you at XYZ corporation? Are you getting what you need to be successful? Is there any way that I can help you? I could be wrong, but I don't think that there's any woman that would turn around and say, go away, I don't need your help. I think that they would engage in an honest conversation for the most part, and frankly, if they don't, then that is to their detriment. The simple answer to that question, Jim, is ask. How are you doing? Is there any way that I can help?
And my response back to that, Denise, would be if you're on the other side, on the female side, and you're not being asked, then tell. Speak right up. Because you'll find most men are going to be receptive to that because they just don't know.
Absolutely.
So that's my comment.
Yep.
Create metrics that matter. We talked about that. Oh, assessments and benchmarks, that's really, to me, part of the crux of what you brought up. There's a difference between, as we said, just counting numbers and actually doing a benchmark. And the benchmarks are where, and this is a little promotional here, are where you and your organization lead inclusively can come in. If this is to the people on the call, if you're in an organization and you're not sure where they are, or you're pretty sure that you're not where the organization is not where it needs to be, Denise is available and her staff to come on site and help, do assessments, speak with upper management. Clearly, Denise is positioned to speak to anybody within the organization and see if they can create good benchmarks, a good strategy, action plans, and then move things forward. So I have a comment from Diane that says, listening to the comments are eye-opening. And this, I can just feel this in a male-dominated willingness to build networks. I'm just kind of skimming over some of this. How are you taken seriously? Oh, I love this one, and there were several thumbs up following this. Diverse slate of candidates, and in capitals, and also a diverse slate of interviewers.
Yep,
and I think that's a great point. Someone else.
Critical. Yep, critical.
And I love this question because I think it's so applicable, especially in today's society. How do we engage C-suite women leaders who outwardly and publicly disparage women who are non-gender conforming, particularly young women who are looking to the C-suite leaders for direction and encouragement? And as an employment attorney, boy, you're qualified to answer that one.
So here's the thing. I have this expression, and I'm not sure if I made it up or picked it up, to be honest with you, but it just does seem like senior female leaders fall into two camps. One are the women that have had a really hard time climbing the ladder and then pull other women up after them, and I consider myself in that category. It's part of my personal mission. And the second are women who climb the ladder through great adversity and then pull up the ladder after themselves. And unfortunately, there's no way to control that, right? We're all human beings, and we're guided by our ethos and our internal values. And in fairness to the women who don't promote other women, some of them are just tired, and they feel like, you know what, it takes all my energy to just be good at what I do. I don't have the bandwidth to go further. But to the point of the person who chatted this, I think what she's saying is, some women actually go one step further, which is to disparage. And I actually, I'm sure I must have observed that at some point, but it's not coming to me, a specific example related to that. And I would just say, shame on you. If you're a senior leader and you actually got to the C-suite and you have, negative things to say about women or as a group of people, then shame on you. Sorry, but I don't know how to, say that in a more eloquent or professional manner.
Yeah, the emphasis on the question I thought was the non-gender conforming.
And so like the aggressive behavior or... Yes, yeah. I will say I do have the experience of sometimes women being as hard, if not harder, on me as I was coming up through senior leadership. I do know what you mean by that. I have had women say to me, Denise, you're attractive. Why don't you just smile more and nod more and speak less. I have had senior female leaders tell me that. So if that was the intent, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And maybe to some extent they were trying to protect me. They were trying to help me get out of my own way. But at the end of the day, we are only effective as people to the extent that we can be authentic, right? If I have to pretend that I am something other than what I am, I can't function well. I can't stay within my zone of genius, and I can't reach my full potential. So that kind of advice is absolutely not helpful.
Okay. Generally speaking, I apologize to anyone if I missed your question in the chat bar. I think we covered most of the conversation, most of the topics. However, notice at the bottom of the slide that's still up, Denise Hummel at leadinclusively.com. Feel free to email Denise or me, Jim Penny, at the National Diversity Council, and either one of us will be glad to get back. I would encourage the people still on the call to communicate with Denise and her staff, because Chelsea put up quite a few links and references to articles, and if you didn't get those or you're uncertain, if you'll communicate with Lead Inclusively, they'll be glad to send you those. And then, of course, as I indicated earlier, Denise and her organization, and especially through the National Diversity Council and the National Training Center, we have people available that are in a position to come in and do serious assessment, create an action plan, strategies, and get right down into it, according to the action plan, the tactics that will move the ball forward, especially to help unite women with men to move through senior leadership. No need is more critical, in my opinion, than that specific topic.
You're wonderful, Jim. And I did want to say, I noticed that you put your cell phone there, and so did I. So you have direct access to me. If instead you prefer to call the company itself, feel free to go to leadinclusively.com, and the office telephone number is there, and we can connect you to whoever might help you meet your needs. But Jim, you really are a male champion, I have to say. You're very astute. You're a self-professed, we'll just say more experienced generation, and yet you really are very attuned to these issues and very supportive of female leaders, and we appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure to do that, and I appreciate you just flat out not calling me old.
Okay, you have my promise.
All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for your attention. We sincerely appreciate it. Denise, we have lots of thumbs up, and thank you. Great webinar. Thank you. So all kinds of accolades. A lot of people want to listen to the recording, so we'll make that available. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your participation. We're here to help in any way through the National Diversity Council, the National Training Center, and Lead Inclusively. And we, as Denise said, encourage you to contact us, reach out, and we're glad to help you in any way we can, help you to move the ball forward from wherever you happen to be to wherever it is you want to or need to be. And with that, I'm going to conclude the seminar. Thank you once again for attending, and we'll look forward to the next presentation from Denise, and we look forward to hearing from all of you in the future. Thank you so very much. Bye for now.
Thanks, Jim. Bye-bye.